Years after her husband died, May Capone gave her son a piece of advice about how to live. She did not tell him to stay out of trouble. She did not warn him about the police or the newspapers or the men who used to come to the house. She said, "Don't do as your father did. He broke my heart." That is the whole marriage in 6 words, from the only person who was inside it for the entire 29 years. And she said it about a man who is remembered as one of the great American love stories of the underworld. Al Capone, who bedded countless women and only ever loved one. Al Capone, who wrote to her from Alcatraz, calling their son "Heart of Mine." Al Capone, who came home broken and was nursed by his wife until the day he died. All of that is true. And it is also true that she told their only child that his father had broken her heart, and to make sure he never did the same thing to anybody. Here is what she was actually married to. She married him on the 30th of December 1918 in a church in Brooklyn. Their son had been born 26 days earlier. She was 21 years old. He was 19. And on the marriage license, both of them were recorded as being 20, because May was 2 years older than her husband and did not want that written down. By the date of that wedding, Al Capone had almost certainly already contracted syphilis. He had picked it up working as a bouncer in the establishments, run by a Chicago boss named Big Jim Colosimo, from one of the women working there. He never had it properly treated. Their son, Albert Francis Capone, was born with it. So the arithmetic of this marriage is that a 21-year-old Irish Catholic girl from Brooklyn married a 19-year-old with an untreated venereal disease 26 days after giving birth to a child who already had it, and lied about her age on the paperwork. They never had another living child. This is what happened inside Al Capone's marriage, and it is nastier than you think. Start with who she actually was, because almost nobody knows, and it matters for everything that follows. Mary Josephine Coughlin, May, was born in Brooklyn in April of 1897, one of 6 children of Irish immigrants. Her family were respectable, aspirational, and seriously religious. And she remained a devout Catholic for the whole of her life. That is not a decorative detail. It is the load-bearing fact of this entire story, and we will come back to it, because it explains a decision that otherwise makes no sense at all. Accounts differ on how they met. Some say a party in Carroll Gardens. Others say that Al's mother knew May from church and effectively arranged the introduction. Either way, it moved fast. She became pregnant before they were married, which in a Brooklyn Irish Catholic family in 1918 was a serious matter. And by the accounts that survive, neither family made an issue of it. There is a reasonable theory as to why an Italian-Irish marriage in that neighborhood, at that moment, smoothed over frictions that both sides had an interest in smoothing. Sonny was born on the 4th of December, 1918. They married on the 30th. Now here is the part that reframes the early years. And it is worth being careful about, because there is a version of this that gets stated too confidently. Al Capone contracted syphilis as a young man, before the marriage, from a sex worker at one of Colosimo's premises. That is well established. And it was confirmed by medical examination when he entered federal prison in 1931. He did not treat it. The treatments available at the time were unpleasant and unreliable, and by most accounts, he simply refused to deal with it. Sonny was born with congenital syphilis. That is also well established. And it is the reason the child was sickly from the start, and the reason that as a small boy, he developed a mastoid infection, an infection of the bone behind the ear, which in the 1920s frequently killed children. He needed brain surgery. He survived it. He was left permanently deaf in one ear, what is not established. And I want to be straight about this because a great many places state it as fact is whether May herself was infected. Some sources say she was, others say it remains inconclusive and that she appeared to escape the worst of it. What is documented is that after Sonny, the couple never had another living child, and that the attempts ended in stillbirths and miscarriages, which many writers attribute to the disease. I cannot tell you with confidence that Al Capone gave his wife syphilis. I can tell you that he was infected before he married her, that he never treated it, that their only child was born with it and nearly died of it, that every subsequent pregnancy ended, and that the same infection would eventually destroy his own mind and kill him at 48. Whatever the precise medical picture inside that house, one man's decision not to see a doctor ran through the entire family. Then there is the thing that May herself said hurt most, and it was not the disease, and it was not the crime. It was the other women. She knew what her husband did for a living. She was not naive, and she was not kept in the dark. She lived in the houses the money bought, at a scale that made the source impossible to ignore. By all accounts, she never involved herself in the business, and she never asked. And that was the arrangement. The infidelity was different, because it was personal, and because it was constant. Al Capone slept with a great many women across the whole of the marriage. It was not a secret in Chicago, and it was not a secret in the house. And here is where her Catholicism becomes the center of the story, rather than a background detail. She did not leave. There is a report from a Chicago magazine that she had not been married long before she became genuinely fed up with the cheating. And she stayed anyway for 29 years, through the rise, through Chicago, through the Valentine's Day massacre, through the tax trial, through Atlanta and Alcatraz, through 8 years of nursing him at the end. Some of that was love. There is no serious doubt that they loved each other, and the letters prove it. And some of it was that a devout Irish Catholic woman in the 1920s in America did not divorce her husband, no matter what he did. The church did not permit it. Her family would not have understood it. And she had a son with a disability, no independent income, and a surname that had become one of the most notorious words in the English language. She was not trapped by Al Capone. She was trapped by the whole structure around her, and he was simply the man standing in the middle of it. In 1931, he was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years. Sonny was 13, and the marriage entered its strangest phase because May Capone became, for the better part of a decade, the manager of a man who was not there. She visited him. She wrote constantly. She kept the household running and kept the boy in school. And she lobbied, persistently and effectively, for his early release on medical grounds. The letters that survive from Alcatraz do not sound like a gangster at all. He wrote to Sonny, hoping that things would go their way the next year, and that then he would have the boy in his arms. He called him Heart of Mine. He signed it, Love and Kisses, Your Dear Dad. And then, beneath his name, his prison number, 85. Meanwhile, the disease was doing its work. By the late 1930s, the syphilis had reached his brain, producing the condition doctors call paresis. He collapsed in custody. He was transferred to the prison hospital. Doctors attempted treatment, and it was far too late. He was released in November of 1939, and May's campaign was a substantial part of the reason. She got him out, and then she had to live with what came back. The man who returned to the family house on Palm Island in Miami was, by the assessment of the doctors who examined him, functioning at roughly the level of a 12-year-old child. He was 40 years old. He never went back to Chicago. He never went back to the organization, which had long since moved on and was running perfectly well without him. For the last 8 years of his life, he fished off his own dock, played cards with people who humored him, and drifted in and out of lucidity. And May ran everything. She managed the household. She managed his care. And most of all, she managed the door. because people came to look. He was the most famous criminal in the world, reduced to a confused man in a garden in Florida. And there was an appetite for that. Journalists, sightseers, the curious. She shielded him from all of it for 8 years. And by every account, she did it fiercely. Consider what those 8 years actually were. This is a woman in her 40s who had married at 21, whose husband had given her a child with a congenital infection, whose subsequent pregnancies had all ended, who had spent the marriage knowing about the other women, and who spent the last stretch of it as a full-time nurse to a man who could no longer follow a conversation. He was not a gangster by then. He was a patient, and she was the one who fed him and kept the visitors out and sat with him. On the 21st of January, 1947, he had a stroke. Pneumonia set in. His heart stopped on the 25th. He was 48 years old, and he died in a guest room of his own house with his wife in it. She was 50. And here is where this stops being a story about a marriage and becomes a story about what a marriage costs after it ends. May Capone outlived her husband by 39 years. She never remarried, and she spent those 4 decades doing one thing with remarkable consistency, which was defending a name she had taken at 21 and could never put down. She stayed out of the press. She refused interviews. She protected her son and her grandchildren from a reputation none of them had built. In 1952, she sold the Palm Island house for $54,000 because she could no longer afford the taxes on it, a property her husband had bought for $40,000 in 1928 at the height of his power. In real terms, after 24 years, she took a loss on the most famous private residence in America and moved in with her sister. In 1964, she and Sonny sued Desilu Productions, the company owned by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, over the portrayal of her husband in the television series The Untouchables. Desi Arnaz had gone to school with Sonny in Miami. The suit failed. The legal reasoning was that you cannot defame a dead man. Al Capone had no reputation left to protect in law because he was no longer a person. He was a fact of public history, which meant that the name May Capone had spent her life defending was, in the eyes of the courts, public property. Anyone could do anything with it. She had no standing to object and never would. 2 years later, her son legally changed his surname. May Capone died in Florida in 1986 at 89 years old. So, was the marriage nastier than you think? Here is what it consisted of. She married a 19-year-old with an untreated venereal disease 26 days after bearing his son and lied about her age on the license. The child was born infected, nearly died of it as an infant, needed brain surgery, and lost the hearing in one ear. Every pregnancy after that one ended. Her husband was unfaithful throughout, publicly, in a city where everyone knew. He went to prison for 11 years when their son was 13. She campaigned to get him out on medical grounds, succeeded, and was rewarded with a man whose mind had been eaten away, whom she then nursed for 8 years until he died at 48. She spent the following 39 years defending him, sold the house at a loss, lost a lawsuit that established she had no legal claim to her own married name, and watched her only child abandon it entirely. And through all of that, she never gave an interview, never wrote a book, never sold a photograph, and never publicly said a word against him. She said one thing to her son in private: "Don't do as your father did. He broke my heart." That is the entire testimony of the woman who was there for all of it. And it is the only sentence about Al Capone that came from inside the marriage rather than from a newspaper, a courtroom, or a film. 6 words, 39 years of silence around them.